Welcome back, everyone. Today we're taking a deep dive into AI, specifically in the European public sector. We'll be looking at how these organizations are, thinking about the skills and structures they need to really make these AI projects work.
And luckily, there's this great report to help us out.
Oh, is this the 2024 one from the European Commission?
Yeah, the Joint Research Center put it out.
They always do such thorough work.
Yeah.
What all did they look at?
Well, it's a pretty comprehensive report, academic research, policy documents. They even had an expert workshop. Plus, they've got case studies from like 7 public organizations across Europe.
Wow, so they really tried to, get a broad perspective on things. So it's not just theoretical, it's also kind of grounded in what's actually happening.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the JRC's goal is to figure out what it really takes to successfully implement beneficial AI. And they're, making it clear that just having the technology itself isn't enough.
Right, of course. It's kind of like, I don't know, having all the fancy kitchen gadgets but no idea how to use them.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So where do we even begin to unpack all of this?
Well, they've got this framework, a three-dimensional framework for AI competencies. And it's, clear right away that it's not just about like coding skills.
Okay, 3 dimensions. So what are we talking about here?
So they break it down into technology, managerial, and then this one's really important, the policy, legal, and ethical dimension.
Okay, so they're thinking about, all the different aspects of it, not just the tech itself.
Right. And then within each of those dimensions, they look at 3 different competency clusters. They call them attitudinal, operational, and literacy.
So it's kind of like, why is this important? How do we actually do this?
Okay.
And what are we even talking about?
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Okay, I like that. So let's dive into the technology dimension first. What kind of skills are we talking about there? What really stands out?
Going through the case studies, one thing that really jumped out at me was this emphasis on data-oriented culture.
Okay, data-oriented culture. So what, everyone in the organization needs to be a data scientist or something.
No, not exactly. It's more about the entire organization recognizing that data is essential to public service. It's not just an IT issue.
So is that where those attitudinal competencies come in? It's like
Yeah.
a mindset shift?
Exactly. And there's this great example in the report. A city government completely changed their approach to data. They started seeing it as like this strategic asset, not just, something that the IT department deals with.
Hmm, interesting. So what do they do with all this data?
Well, because they saw it as important, they used it for everything. Optimizing public services, informing policy decisions. It really changed how they operated.
That's pretty impressive. And I can see how a shift like that would need some strong leadership to, get everyone on board.
For sure. And that actually leads us right into the managerial dimension.
Okay, yeah, let's talk about that. What does the report say about leadership in this context?
Well, they basically say that for AI to be successfully implemented, you need a new kind of leader. Someone who doesn't just get the tech, but can also guide their organization through all the, complex changes that come with adopting AI.
So it's not just about knowing how the algorithms work, but also understanding the bigger picture, like how this stuff impacts people and the organization as a whole.
Precisely. One of the key attitudinal competencies they highlight is strategic foresight.
Strategic foresight, okay. I can see why that would be important. So we're talking about thinking ahead, anticipating potential problems, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and also considering the long-term implications of using AI, making sure it's aligned with the organization's values and that it's actually serving citizens' needs. There's a good example of this in one of the case studies.
Which one?
It involved a public healthcare organization. They were trying to balance the efficiency gains of AI-driven diagnoses with, concerns about patient privacy and data security.
Yeah, that's a tough one. It seems like with AI, you often have these amazing potential benefits, but also these really serious risks to consider.
Exactly. And that's why having leaders with that strategic foresight is so crucial. They need to be able to navigate those complexities and make sure AI is being used responsibly.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got the right mindset about data leadership that can handle the big picture. What's the third piece of this puzzle?
The third dimension is policy, legal, and ethical.
Oh, right, that one. Seems especially relevant in the EU with all their focus on responsible AI.
Absolutely. And One of the most important competencies they highlight in this dimension is something called AI procurement literacy.
AI procurement literacy. Okay, I'm not familiar with that one. What is that all about?
So think about it. Governments often work with private tech companies to develop and implement AI systems, right? But if they don't really understand how these systems work, what their limitations are, what the potential risks might be, they could end up in a bad situation.
Like being taken advantage of by the tech companies.
Yeah, or ending up with systems that don't actually meet their needs. There's a case study in the report about a municipality that implemented a facial recognition system.
Oh, I can see where this is going.
They did it for security purposes, but they didn't really understand the potential for bias and privacy violations. It ended up being a huge mistake, both costly and really controversial.
Wow. Yeah, that's a good illustration of why this AI procurement literacy is so important. You need to be an informed buyer, right?
Yeah.
Not just taking the tech companies at their word.
Right, and it's not just about avoiding those kinds of disastrous outcomes. It's also about making sure that public money is being spent wisely and that these AI systems are actually serving the public good.
Makes sense. So we've got the right mindset about data, leadership that can see the big picture, and a smart approach to working with tech companies. Anything else on the skills front before we move on?
There's a lot more detail in the report, but
Yeah.
one final competency I'd highlight is understanding AI project cycles. Public organizations need to move past this idea of, like, we built it, we're done, you know?
Right, so it's not just a one-time thing. You have to keep working at it.
Exactly. You need ongoing monitoring, evaluation, maybe even retraining the system. The data changes, users' needs evolve, even new ethical considerations pop up.
So it's like any other complex system. You need to maintain it, adapt it as things change.
Yeah, think of it like, I don't know, building a bridge. You don't just build it and assume it'll stand forever, right?
Yeah,
You need to regularly check for problems, make repairs, account for the fact that the river might change over time.
I like that analogy. And with AI, the stakes are probably even higher because it has the potential to impact people's lives in a really significant way.
Absolutely. That's why understanding that AI projects are dynamic and they require that ongoing attention is so crucial.
Okay, so we've covered the skill side of things, but I know this report also looks at how organizations are structuring themselves for AI success. What can you tell us about that?
That's the next piece of the puzzle, yeah. The JRC framework outlines all these different governance practices that public organizations are using, and that's what we'll unpack next.
Okay, so we've talked about the skills public organizations need to really make AI work for them. But skills alone aren't enough, are they? You need like the right structure in place too.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's like you can have the most talented football team in the world, but without a good coach and a solid game plan, they're not going to win any championships.
I like that analogy.
And that's where governance practices come in. This is how the JRC report kind of frames it. It got three main categories: procedural, structural, and relational.
Okay, those sound pretty broad. What do they actually mean in practice?
Well, let's take them one by one. Procedural practices, that's all about the, how do I say it, the processes, the guidelines, the protocols, all the things that kind of guide decision-making and how you actually implement AI.
So it's like the rule book for AI, kind of.
Yeah. And they break it down even further, looking at strategic, tactical, and operational levels.
Different levels for different scopes. I get it. Yeah. So what are some of the key things they highlight at that strategic level?
One of the most important things I talk about is developing ethical guidelines for AI.
Makes sense. So like rules to ensure AI is used ethically.
Exactly. These guidelines should reflect, societal norms and values, make sure AI is used responsibly and for the public good. It made me wonder, are there any ethical AI guidelines in your country?
Honestly, I'm not really sure. It's not something I've thought about a lot. I'll have to look into that. What kind of problems could come up if there weren't any guidelines?
Oh, all sorts of things.
Yeah.
Imagine a public agency using an AI system, say, to allocate social welfare benefits. But there's no clear ethical guidelines. There's a real risk of bias sneaking into the system, leading to unfair outcomes.
Yeah, you could end up with a system that discriminates against certain groups of people without even realizing it.
Exactly. Having those guidelines from the start helps ensure that AI is actually beneficial for everyone, not just a select few.
Right. It's about using this powerful technology in a way that's fair and equitable. Okay, so ethical guidelines are key at the strategic level. What about the tactical level? What kind of procedural practices are we talking about there?
So the tactical level is about putting those ethical principles into action, right? So you need things like data governance frameworks, procedures for managing data quality, making sure it's accurate, and then, risk management procedures are essential too.
So you're not just thinking about the ethical principles in the abstract, you're actually putting systems in place to make sure they're followed in practice.
Precisely. They give a good example in the report, a city that was implementing a smart traffic management system. They realized that the system was only as good as the data it was getting.
Yeah, of course, if the data is bad, the system's not going to work properly.
So they had to create these robust data quality management procedures. That way, the system was making decisions based on good, reliable information. Otherwise, it could cause real chaos.
Yeah, imagine the traffic lights going haywire because the system's getting bad data. Be a nightmare.
Yeah.
And I guess those risk management procedures are crucial too, given all the things that could potentially go wrong with AI.
Oh, absolutely. Another case study focused on a healthcare agency. They were using AI for patient triage. But obviously, you need to be super careful with a system like that.
Yeah, people's lives are at stake.
Right. So they had these rigorous risk management processes in place, making sure the system was functioning safely, having clear protocols for dealing with any errors or unexpected outcomes.
Okay, so a lot of thought needs to go into those tactical procedures. Makes sense. What about the operational level?
Well, at the operational level, it's about those on-the-ground procedures, right? The nitty-gritty of actually implementing and managing these AI systems. Things like having clear procedures for eliminating bias, ensuring algorithmic transparency so people can understand how decisions are being made. Also, they talk about standardizing AI protocols and figuring out how to reuse AI models that have worked well in one context for other situations.
That's a lot to think about. I mean, how do you even go about eliminating bias in an AI system? That seems like a huge challenge.
Well, it starts with being aware of the potential for bias, right? Let's say, for example, a police department wants to use an AI system to identify high crime areas.
So they're using AI to help with crime prevention.
Right, but they need to make sure that the data used to train the system isn't already biased against certain neighborhoods or demographic groups. That could lead to unfair policing practices.
I can see how that could easily happen.
Yeah, so they need to really audit that data, use techniques to mitigate any existing biases, and maybe even get input from the community to make sure the system is fair and equitable.
It's almost like you need a whole other set of procedures just to deal with the ethical implications of the AI system itself.
It's complex, that's for sure. Okay, so we've covered procedural practices, those processes and guidelines. Now let's move on to structural practices. This is all about how organizations are actually structuring themselves to make AI work.
Okay, so it's not just about having the right procedures. It's about having the right people in the right roles.
Right. They look at this from those same three levels: strategic, tactical, and operational. One key thing they highlight at that strategic level is establishing independent ethics committees.
Okay, I can see why that would be important. Having an independent body to provide oversight on all these AI projects.
Exactly. Think about a government agency developing an AI system that could impact people's privacy. The ethics committee would be there to, review the project, assess those risks, and make recommendations to ensure it's developed and deployed ethically.
So they'd be like the watchdogs, making sure everything's being done by the book.
Yeah, a good way to put it. And at the tactical level, they talk a lot about defining those clear roles and responsibilities within the organization. Who's in charge of data governance? Who's overseeing the AI projects? You need to make sure it's clear who's doing what.
Right, so everyone knows what they're supposed to be doing and who they're accountable to.
Exactly. One effective approach they talk about is setting up data governance boards.
Data governance boards. So like a committee specifically focused on data management and AI.
Right. They'd have people from different parts of the organization: IT, legal, policy, even subject matter experts from different departments.
That makes sense. Gets everyone around the table so you're not making decisions in a vacuum.
Exactly. And then, of course, at the operational level, it's about putting all those roles and responsibilities into action.
So like implementing safety barriers to prevent misuse of AI systems, or creating structures so end users can actually participate in the development process.
Yeah, all of that. They give a really good example in the report. A public transportation agency, they were developing a new AI-powered scheduling system, and they actually involved the bus drivers and the passengers in the development process.
Wow, that's really interesting. I guess it makes sense. Those are the people who will be most impacted by the system, so their input is valuable.
Right. And it helps build trust in the system, too, because people feel like they've had a say in how it's designed.
Okay, so we've covered procedural and structural practices. Now, what about that last category, the relational practices?
Relational practices. This is all about how people work together. It's about communication, collaboration, and building trust, all those human elements that are so crucial.
Yeah, it makes sense. Even with the best AI system in the world, if people can't communicate and collaborate effectively, it's not going to work very well.
Absolutely. And they look at this from those same three levels, again, strategic, tactical, and operational. One thing they talk about at the strategic level is establishing communities of practice.
Communities of practice, what exactly are those?
It's like a group of people who share a common interest and they come together to learn from each other, share best practices. In the context of AI, it might be data scientists, policymakers, ethicists, even citizens, all coming together to talk about the challenges and opportunities of AI in the public sector.
So it's like a way to share knowledge and build connections between people who are working on AI in different contexts.
Exactly. And then at the tactical level, they talk a lot about building trust with users. AI systems can seem like a black box, and people might be hesitant to trust decisions made by algorithms they don't understand.
Yeah, that makes sense, especially when it comes to things like government services. People want to know that decisions are being made fairly and transparently.
Right. And so public organizations need to be really transparent about how they're using AI, what data they're using, how they're addressing those potential risks.
So it's not enough to just have a good AI system. You need to be able to explain it to people, make them comfortable with it.
Exactly. One case study involved a city government that was using AI to personalize public service recommendations.
So, like, suggesting which services people might need based on their situation.
Yeah, that's the idea. But they were very upfront about how the system worked, what data it used, and they even gave people the option to opt out if they didn't want to participate.
Smart move. I bet that went a long way towards building trust with the community.
Hmm.
What about the operational level?
Well, at that level, it's about making sure the communication and collaboration is actually happening, between all the different teams working on AI projects. Maybe create cross-functional working groups, set up regular communication channels, things like that.
So it's about making sure everyone is on the same page and working together effectively.
Right. And another really important thing they highlight is having those mechanisms for reporting issues and concerns.
So if someone notices a problem with an AI system or thinks it might be biased, they have a way to flag it.
Exactly. It could be hotlines, feedback forms, dedicated channels for reporting issues, whatever works, but you need something in place. That way, you can catch those problems early on and make sure they're addressed quickly.
Okay, so that's a lot to think about when it comes to the relational side of AI governance. But it makes sense. You can have the best technology and the clearest procedures, but without those strong relationships and open communication, it's not going to work.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
So we've talked about the skills, the structures. It seems like public organizations are really starting to, get their act together when it comes to AI. But I'm guessing it's not all smooth sailing, right? There must be some challenges along the way.
Oh, yeah, for sure. The report actually goes into quite a bit of detail about the challenges. And one of the biggest ones they point out is just the sheer contextuality of it all.
Contextuality. So like what works in one place might not work in another.
Exactly. There's no one-size-fits-all solution for AI governance. What works for a big national agency might be totally wrong for a small municipality.
Right. Different resources, different data to work with.
Yeah, all of that. And even just the needs of their citizens might be completely different. Plus, you have to factor in the political landscape, which can vary wildly from place to place.
So tailoring those governance practices to the specific context is key. Okay, what other challenges did they highlight?
Regulation was a big one. When the JRC was doing this research, the EU's AI Act was still being developed, so there was a lot of uncertainty.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's like trying to hit a moving target. How are you supposed to plan for something when the rules are still being written?
Exactly. And even once those rules are finalized, keeping up with all the changes, all the new developments in AI, it's a lot.
It's a constantly evolving landscape, that's for sure. And on top of all that, I imagine it's tough to find the right people to actually work on these projects.
Yeah, attracting and retaining talent, that's a major concern they brought up.
Yeah, I can imagine. Especially when you're competing with, all those private tech companies with their big salaries and fancy perks.
Exactly. It's hard to compete with that.
Okay, so we've got all these challenges. Where do you even begin? It all seems a bit overwhelming.
It's a lot to take in, for sure. But the report does offer some really good advice. One key thing they recommend is to start with a thorough self-assessment. Really understand your organization's needs, your resources, your risk tolerance.
So Before you dive in head first, take a step back and figure out where you stand.
Precisely. It's like planning a trip. You wouldn't just hop on a plane without knowing where you're going or how you're getting there, right?
That's a recipe for disaster.
And once you have a clear understanding of your starting point, then you can start developing those tailored strategies for addressing the challenges that are most relevant to you.
Okay, so it's about being strategic, being deliberate in your approach,
Yeah.
not just trying to tackle everything at once.
Right. And another really important thing they emphasize is collaboration. Sharing knowledge and best practices, both within your organization and with other organizations.
That makes a lot of sense. No need to reinvent the wheel if someone else has already figured out a solution to a problem you're facing.
Exactly. Reach out to your peers, learn from each other's successes and failures. It's so valuable. And the Redo also talks about citizen engagement.
Oh, right. That's crucial too. Making sure the people who will be impacted by these systems actually have a voice in how they're developed.
Absolutely. It's not just the ethical thing to do, it's also smart from a practical standpoint. The more input you get from citizens, the more likely you are to end up with systems that are actually useful and effective.
Yeah, it's about building trust and making sure AI is actually serving the public good. Okay, wow, this has been such a fascinating deep dive. I feel like we've covered so much ground.
B2.
We talked about the skills that are needed for AI to succeed, the ways that organizations are structuring themselves, and then all those real-world challenges. It's a complex landscape, but it's also really inspiring to see how AI can be used to make a positive difference in the world.
Couldn't agree more. And it's just the beginning, really. AI is going to continue to evolve, so we need to stay engaged, keep learning, and keep working to shape a future where AI is truly a force for good.
Absolutely. And for our listeners who want to dig deeper into all of this, we'll be sure to include a link to the full JRC report in the show notes. It's a treasure trove of insights and recommendations.
Yeah, definitely check it out. And one final thought I'll leave you with, something that really stuck with me from the report. It's this idea that AI should be used to augment, not replace, human judgment.
Oh, that's a really important point. We shouldn't be afraid of AI, but we also shouldn't just blindly hand over decision-making power to algorithms. It's about finding that balance.
Exactly. It's a question we all need to keep in mind as we move forward. How do we want to balance human oversight with the power of AI in our public institutions? What does that ideal balance look like to you? Something to think about.
That's a great question to ponder. And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive into AI in the public sector. Thanks for joining us, and we'll catch you next time.